Okay, so in some of the other examples, I kind of took a program where the statements were in main, and then I put them in functions instead. Here I'm going to talk about how you can just create your program one function at a time and kind of run it and test it. So I'm going to start out this way. I'm going to write a simple program that's going to I'll put the description up here. Okay, get two integers from the user, calculate the sum, and display the two integers and their sum. Okay. So I'm going to start off writing a function to get the integers. I'll just call it, let's see, I'll call it get values. And what I want this function to do, I'm just going to prompt the user, enter, I don't know, value 1. Okay, now I'm getting this from the user, so it's just simple, you know, cout and cin statements, but I need these two values to go back to the main program so I can use them later on to calculate the sum and then to display the information I need to display. So these guys here need to be reference parameters. That's the only way I can send two things back to the main program. When we use reference parameters, our return type should be void. So there's my first function. I'm going to copy the heading and paste it up here and put a semicolon to create my prototype. And then in here, I'm going to call the function. Okay. Now you'll notice this. These are undeclared at this point, right? It's undefined. So I just need to make sure that I declare them in main. Now remember, they're declared in the function, but that does not mean that they're declared in main. So now I only have one function. It gets this information from the user, and then the program ends. So you can run this now and just make sure there's no errors and make sure what it does up to this point in time is what you're expecting. Okay. All right. So next I need to calculate the sum, and I want to do it in a function. So the function's going to need to have value 1 and value 2 passed to it. I'm going to calculate the sum and return it back out. Since I'm returning one thing back out, I'm going to use a value returning function. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to call this function calc sum, and it's going to need my two values. Okay. And so, right, there's a couple ways you can do this, but this is going to be value 1 plus value 2. All right. And then remember, you need a return statement with these types of functions. And sum is going to have to be declared as an integer. Now we declare it inside the function. We don't put it in the parameter list. If you put it in the parameter list, it means it already has something in main that you're sending to this function, but it doesn't right now. This is where it's getting its value in here. And our return type is going to be an int. Okay, I'm going to get my prototype. I'm going to paste it here. And now I'm going to call this function. Now remember, this is a value returning function. So it returns a value and we need to store that value. So I'm going to put that in an assignment statement and now I have a new variable here that needs to be declared. If you leave this off, the program's not going to work because the sum will be returned and then thrown away. So what I can do now is I can just run this to this point. Okay, I can't really see too much yet, but you know, at least I know it's working and there's no syntax errors and there's no runtime errors. The other thing I'd like to show you here is the alternative to doing this. Right, I'm just going to comment this out. That's putting a comment around it, right? Is you could just do, right? You could do this if you want. You don't need to store it in a variable. You can just return it. Now remember, you can only return one thing, but this is an expression, so it's going to add the two things together and then return the result back out. So either way here would be acceptable. I just wanted to show you some alternative syntax. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to have our display function. And we need to display all three things. Oops. Okay, and I'm going to just put a cout statement here. And this function is a void function. Right? You've got to have a return type. If it's not a value returning function, it's got to be a void function. And now I'm going to copy my heading and I'm going to paste this up at the top. And then I'm going to call that function. Okay, and now I'm going to run it. And there we go. Now that's working. Okay, I'm just going to show you, one more thing about value and reference parameters. See how value 1 is getting a new value stored in it, right, in the cin statement, and the same thing with value 2. That really tells you that they need to be referenced. When you're changing the value of a variable inside of a function, it needs to be referenced. Okay, here we're just using them. Value 1 and value 2 are not being changed. They're coming from the main program, they're being passed in, they're being used. Those are value parameters. And the same thing with your display function. Okay, those are being passed in and they're being used. They're not being changed or updated in any way. And you really have to think about that when you're writing your functions to make sure that you're using the correct type of parameter. If you forget to put a reference when it needs to be there, your program likely won't work. But if you put a reference when one's not needed, your program will work, but it's really not correct. Okay, so that's how you can write a program and kind of incorporate one function at a time, test one function at a time. If the first one doesn't work, the chances of the next function working are really almost zero. So it's always a good idea to kind of do it a little at a time.